Hello, everyone. Welcome to Vision Speak Live. We hope that you are having a great, I guess it's still early evening, right? Couture, it's five, a little bit
Exactly.
after five. So it's still early evening. And we're broadcasting live from Louisville, Kentucky. Yes, Louisville, Kentucky. And just thank you all so much for being here. And for those who watch this later on, whether it's later on this evening or another day on Facebook, YouTube, once it's posted. We're so glad you're here, and it's not by accident that you are tuned in. So, welcome. My name is Dr. Candice, and I'm the host of Vision Speak Live. And I'm so glad to have my sister, my friend, special guest, Keturah Jenkins, on this show. I'm calling the show. So, welcome, Keturah.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here and just to be able to do this with you. We enjoy it so much, just us. So it'll be fun to
Yes.
do it with other people too.
Yes. I love it. And so I want to say, you know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, I need to go back for sure, but I want to say, Couture, that this month, and I know it's the last day in April, which is crazy that tomorrow is May. I want to say that this has been a year, it's the 1 year anniversary of Vision Speak Live. I really think
Mhm.
now, I didn't even think about it until now. Yes.
Okay. That's
And so
amazing.
that is amazing. That is amazing. So, just for those who are watching, jump in the comments. Let us know. Say hello. I don't have the comments pulled up right now, but I see someone did make a comment. So let me see. Oh, thank you, Kiki. Yes. This is our girl Kiki. She said happy birthday. Yes, happy birthday or happy anniversary to Vision Speak Live. Kiki, you're so sweet. And it started out as I was talking to a good friend of mine, Monique O'Neill, and she was just sharing all of the goodness that was going on and what God was doing in her business, in her life. And I'm like, man, people need to hear that. And as we all know, what all was going on this time last year. And so I just felt the call that people need to be encouraged and really to know that God is sovereign and he's still a God of miracles, signs, and wonders. We have to do our part though, right? We have to do
Yeah.
our part with him. And I just felt the call and the need to share that. So that's how it was birthed. It was called Dream Stories, but I changed it to Vision Speak Live, and Vision Speak is the name of my consulting business. So anyway, that's
Love it.
again.
I love
But praise the Lord.
Right. Exactly. Unexpected
Yes,
blessings.
I know he's so good. So Couture, we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. I definitely want to share with everyone viewing or who view this later how we met. And if you know me, listen, I love people. I love people. I really do. And and so I met Keturah, and then you jump in, Keturah, where I'm like,
Yeah.
like on the holes. So we were both at a Leadership Louisville focus group.
Yep.
And so it had to be, was that in 2019 or 2018?
It had to be 2018. Yeah, it had to be 2018.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, 2018. And what's funny is that I still to this day, I'm like, how did they get my information to invite me to this?
No, me too. And I don't even know why I really went. I mean, it's a great organization, but I wasn't like fully vested in them. So there was really no reason I should have been there. Yeah, so I was thinking about this morning. I was like, why did I go to that? But yes, you're right. It was a police group.
That is so funny because we were supposed to meet. I mean, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
that's what it was. Because I remember at my cubicle at work, and I'm like, what, how did I? But I'm like, what a great opportunity to, go do something different. For those who know what I do, I'm usually in the schools and working with students on college access. So, and I'll also be honest, I think they had just opened up that new office on Main Street.
Good, yeah.
I want to go see it. Let me be all the way honest. I want to go to the new building. I love new construction. I know. I just
That's hilarious. But you know what?
Couture.
It's funny. It's how God will use any of these things randomly because there was no reason I should have been there really either. Because it was nothing. They do a lot of internal training in my company. We did it all internally, so we wouldn't be leveraging them. It was, but like I like to say, like God is never surprised. Like He just knew.
Never.
Yeah.
Never. So you all, that's how we met. And I want to say Couture reached out to me and was like, we need to connect. And then that had to be after I went to our hairstylist. Shout out to Rika. Oh,
Yes.
from CNR Beauty Bar, co-owner of CNR Beauty Bar, and she was telling me, she's like, you need to meet Keturah. Like, she reminds me of you. And I'm like, girl, and I probably was in the chair, and y'all know I'm anime. I'm like, girl, we already have a meeting set up. Like, we're already doing lunch and all that.
Right.
Good
We were
stuff.
like doing lunch that next week or something.
I think
Yeah.
so. I think
Yeah.
so. So isn't that amazing, y'all? I just, again, I
Yeah.
love God connects us, and we're sisters, and I just appreciate your support and your energy, and just we just connect.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. My favorite as well is I was presenting at some conference, and then I think somebody texted you like, you need to meet her because she reminds me of you. And we're like, we already got it. But appreciate
yes.
you acknowledging the similar energy that we both have. And just quite frankly, I think when you love what you do, it comes across and people are drawn to you. And I think we both
Yes.
love what we do.
Yes, so good. And back to what you said earlier, how God will use any and everything. If he wants people to meet and be connected, he will do it. And I think it's just
Yeah.
so cool to be able to see those connections and know that that was God. Like, we didn't force that. That's a whole nother word. We didn't force that, like it was just meant to be. So to encourage you all out there, relationship is so important. God designed us for a relationship, and it's so important to have good people in your community that that share the same values and can encourage you. Yeah.
Yeah, and in a way that we can still cultivate that, right? So I do think, like, to your point, there is a cultivation that needs to happen, right? So if we were both like, hey, I want to meet more people, but I'm going to stay right where I am, so you're going to
So
need to bring
good.
him up, right? So you have to kind of be able to participate, but it's there, and I think for me, I remember going into that meeting thinking like I wanted to expand, I wanted to meet some more people who were kind of like minded, but I had no idea that this is what was there. I was thinking as long as I meet one person or two people, and we've been now connected for a couple of years, so it's just great.
Right. So good. So good. So thank you everyone for watching. I'm going to put up these comments because StreamYard is so cool. So thank you, Shaita. She says, happy anniversary. Oh, I'm so excited. Thank you, sis. And then Tasha, my sis, she says, hey, thank you, sis, so much for watching and being here. And my girl, Sharonda, said, glad I made it. Hey, girl. And then Mama, thank you. She says, keep doing great work. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you all. So, okay. So that's how we met, y'all. So good. So Keturah, just tell the people a little bit about yourself, whatever you want to share about who you are and what you do, your family. I shout out family too. So
Yeah. Well, it's the whole story. So we're going to talk about story today, but that, right.
yes.
So if I think about my story, I think about it. So professionally, so I'm a technologist by trade, which some people are like, wait, what? So my degree is in computers, and I've led IT teams for most of my career. What was funny, there was a certain point where I realized that while I was leading these teams, I was really more doing development with them, right? Because if I need to get in and change some code, like we're in a bad place. So not my ministry. So, but what I was doing was helping them develop. And then I had this opportunity to go join a leadership development team, part of the organization. And then I did that for 6 years and loved it. I mean, I was doing some of that stuff kind of personally. And I was kind of intimidated because I'm like, people have degrees in this and, PhDs, and who am I? But so I went in and I got to do some amazing work for like 6 years. That's when I got my certification to be an executive coach. I helped them create curriculum. I taught classes around the world. I learned about them. It was just amazing. So I was doing that for a while. And then kind of in a twist of fate, my story changed back. I kind of came back to IT. So in my current role, I lead another IT team. But it feels like a really good combination of all of my skills, like the process stuff, the technical stuff, and the leadership development. So that's kind of how my story came full circle. But it still wilds people out sometimes when I'm presenting this stuff and they're like, wait, what, you're in IT? Like, I thought you guys were all backroom. I'm like, not all of us.
Right.
So that's kind of the professional part of my story. Personally, I am married. I have two beautiful children. I've been in Louisville now for like 14 years almost, which is longest I've lived anywhere, and love it here. I have 6 brothers. which is why.
Keturah, I did not know that.
Yes. Which is why when I go to all these meetings in technology and I'm the only woman, I'm like, I'm good because
Been there, done that, right?
Right, exactly. And I love to travel. So haven't traveled a ton lately, but I always tell my husband if I'm ever missing, I'm somewhere in a book then because I love to just learn. And so if I can't go there, I'm gonna go there in a book. So that's kind of about me personally as well.
So good. And check out the background. Like I feel like your library is a little bit more extensive than mine. Still in that library.
Multiple libraries in the house. I'm gonna go broke on books, and I'm gonna always be in a book.
Yes, I love it. I love it. We're definitely connected right there because it's so funny. I have like, okay, I have this right here. Most of those books back there I've read, and so, there's some other stuff up there, not just books. And then on my nightstand, I have a stack of books. And then on my floor in my bedroom, I have some books. And I will read them this year.
It's necessary.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think of how, some people escape through television. Like for me, I feel like I love to learn through any means necessary. And it's like in a book, it's great because they can paint all these pictures. So yes. I love it. I love it.
Yes. And I feel like there's nothing like holding a book. I don't know. Do you do ebooks? I know this is kind of random, but I'm just bringing it up. She's like, no.
Okay, because I feel so, I don't even know at this point how I got through college because I feel like when I'm on my device, then I'm like, who emailed me? What's on Instagram? Right? Same. So no, I go with a physical book. And actually, yes. My 9-year-old, my daughter, she's right there with me. Even when she was little, girl, she would go into daycare and they're going for toys and she would be going for books. And she just inhaled books, which is beautiful thing that we can share.
I love that. So, so good. So good. So let me ask this about your family. How have you all been doing? And like I said, I know it's been a year and it's been a year, right? However you want to take that. So how's your family doing? How have you all been doing in the midst of everything?
Yeah, so when we went home, and it's funny, I'm looking this direction because on my wall, I have the date that we went home, which is March 12th. That's when I was in a meeting and they were like, just go ahead and go home.
Okay, right? So wait a minute. So y'all, wait, sorry. Because you all actually, so this is VisionSPEAK Live, but what happened is we're really like at lunch and you all just so happen to be listening. So, so we're just having a good conversation. So Keturah, same thing, March 12th in a meeting and they were like, don't travel nowhere. And I'm like, what? So go ahead. Same thing.
So go home. And I remember going home and thinking, none of us knew how long it was going to be or anything like that. But I remember thinking, this is not going to work because my husband teaches. So that meant he was coming home and my children are young. So I was like, all of us at home. And even though my office is in the basement and it's a walkout, I have light, but you can still like hear them. And so I was like, this is not going to work. However, the gracious God that we serve, it has actually not been horrible, right? So, I mean, we found this nice balance. So I'm able to get some stuff done. I'll run upstairs and check on the kids. So all those things have gone pretty well. Now, I will say about probably 3 months in, I was kind of stressed and my husband's like, you need to get out of the house. So he instituted like at least once or twice a week, just leave, go sit in the park and read a book, go do whatever. So he was really helpful to help me find that balance because I was finding that I was not leaving the house at all, which was not helpful for my personality.
Yeah. So good. And shout out to your hubby for saying, yeah, you gotta get out. Just a few days, couple hours. Yeah. Get on out.
Right. Yeah. In like all the loving ways. He was like,
yes. You're like, okay, let me get on my stuff. So good. So you mentioned that you've been in Louisville, you said 14 years?
Yeah, close to. Yep.
Okay, close to 14 years. So where were you born?
Yeah, so I was born in Detroit, Michigan. But here's the thing. Right, shout out to Detroit. But I left Detroit when I was 6. So before I turned 30, I had lived in 6 states and 2 of them twice. And so I was just kind of bouncing around. And there was nothing, people were like, oh, military? No, my mom's a physician. We just it just happened that we moved and then I went to boarding school and then I went away to college. And then my company moved me right out of college. And so when I landed here, I thought I was just moving. I was going to live here a couple years like everywhere else and move on.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, so I moved from Chicago here, and everyone was like, "Who moves from
Right.
Chicago to
Right.
Louisville,
I
Kentucky,
know.
and you're single?" And I was like, "Listen, one, it was so clear that the Lord was opening this door. Like it was just, I can't even lay out for you all the things where it was just like all arrows pointing here."
Listen.
And I told people, I don't serve a God of statistics. So if there is someone for me, I only need one. So, and if God is telling me to move here, either he's there or it's going to be somewhere else. But, I'm trusting the path that I'm on. And we've loved it here. So my husband moved here like 6 months after I moved here. And now we have, this house, the kids, all the things.
So good. I forgot that part of your story, sis.
Yeah.
And something you just said about trusting God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have such a belief, and I know we're going to get into just talking about this whole concept of your story. I
Yep.
just have such a belief that our story is not something like just made up. It's not something we
So
get from a
good.
TV. Like it's something that has been placed in you, and it's about us finding and realizing that story and putting it into place. And I think I'm always most comfortable when I know I'm on the path that God has for me.
So
And
good.
even if that path sometimes is going to be difficult, right? So that doesn't mean it's going to be all roses,
Right.
but but if I'm on the path, I know in the end it's going to be okay. And like I saw this quote that said, if it's not okay, then it's not the end. Like just hang on in.
Say it again, sis. And someone type that in the comments. Come on now.
Yeah, if you're on the right path, listen, it's going to be okay in the end.
Yep.
And sometimes we got to hang in there. Sometimes we see the end quickly, and sometimes it takes a while to see it. And that's what I've seen in my career. That's what I've seen
Yep.
personally, just as I'm, I would say, finding and having confidence walking in my story. Because the
So good.
story's always been there, but it's about me acknowledging and walking in that story. Or am I trying to walk in somebody else's story, which is a
Mm, so good. And I keep thinking about the verse in Hebrews where it says he's the author
yeah,
and the finisher of our faith, so getting
yeah,
in alignment, that's what I'm hearing too, as you're talking about on the right path, aligned with his story, like
yeah.
that's where he would have us. That's where provision is. That's where everything that we need, but he's writing, he has written the story.
Yeah, it's there. It's for us to, I mean, I think he gives these beautiful, I like the word that you use, provisions. He gives us these beautiful ways for us to bring the story to life, right? So I think about how early in my career, well actually, so in my career I realized I had all these amazing mentor women, right? And it wasn't until much later that I realized that all of them were either single or married with no children. And so in my mind, I had kind of said, okay, that path, then I have to not have kids. And so at the point where I had
Mm,
children, I figured that my story meant that, I was only going to go so high and from a corporate perspective. But that's not the story God had for me.
right.
And sometimes when we try to walk in someone else's story, then we kind of block what's possible for us. Because I had a friend and I was telling her on a recent promotion, and she's like, "Yeah, you've been operating at that level for a while." And I'm like, "No, no, no, like this is great." And she's like, "No, you could have been here a while ago. You're good." But I'd hampered my story based on what I had
Mhm.
seen other people's choices, which again, that could have been their story, but that doesn't mean it
Yeah.
has.
That's so good, sis. So we're just on in. Okay. So let me at least put this up. So hey everybody, if you're just jumping on, I am so excited to have my special guest, my sister, Keturah Jenkins, and we're talking about the power of your story. And we're just already on in. So if you're getting here now, stay with us. This will be on the Facebook page when we're done, so you can go back and catch the beginning. So I was like, I need to put this title up there.
Right.
Okay. So in terms of the power of your story, and it's just something you said. So give me a moment because the question was here and then it kind of left me, but it will come back. And then maybe not, but if it does, I'll get back to it. So let me just look at the little notes that I took. So you did write a book. I'm gonna just transition to that, and I'm going to hold it up. I know it's in back of you too, but I have it right here too. Look, everybody. Yes, don't y'all love these colors? Like, this is so Keturah. Like, and she has this kind of mustard color on right now. So
Exactly. The whole point of it, right, is like even in the color, it's like this finding your story should not be like a sad ordeal. It should be something that's happy and exciting and you can have fun doing it. It shouldn't be like,
yes.
oh, I got to do this thing.
So good. Yeah, because the concept of story, I mean, just takes me back to, you're talking about our love for books. When you're little, who doesn't like a good story? I'm visualizing, like, whether you're at school or at home, you're sitting on the floor and you're, your hands on your chin, like listening to this story. And I just believe, with God, he has an amazing, sometimes crazy adventure for us to go on. So so your book, how did the concept of this book come about?
Yeah, so I was, I had gone through this period, and what I usually tell people is like, somebody asks you how you're doing, and we all are like, we all say fine, but
Yep.
but in my mind, when people would ask me that, I would say to myself, like, I'm at about a 6.5, like scale of 1 to 10, I'm at like a 6.5, which means like nothing's horrible, but like it's not great, but 6.5. And because when I looked around, I'm like, I'm so blessed. I love my husband. He's amazing. And girl, he's fine. But anyway, and I love my kids. And our church family is amazing. But it's just like I wasn't excited about anything. And so what I did was I kind of, after being in this place for a while, I sat down and started asking myself questions that I would ask people as I was coaching them. So I'm like, okay, if someone else was in this place, what would I start asking them? So I was just jotting down questions, and then the questions kind of built on each other, and it was really kind of helping me figure out this space. So anyway, I take a picture, send it to a friend of mine who's also an executive coach, and shout out to Eva Ford, who's been a lifelong friend of mine. And she was like, well, where did you get this from? And I was like, no, I just kind of thought it up. And she's like, you've got to publish this. This is amazing. And so that kind of churned the wheels of like, oh, maybe this is something that is not just helpful for me, but could be helpful for other people as well.
So good. I was just going to say, get you friends who do that to you. Like,
oh, yeah. Right. Because sometimes even in our stories, that sometimes it takes someone outside the story to be like, hey, this is your path, because we can't see it because we're so close.
Absolutely. We need all the characters, right? Like, I mean, that's what also makes the story, right? Like, and we talked earlier about relationships. So yes, be open to that. And ensure that you have people in your life that are speaking that to you, like, girl, yeah, you need to publish that because this is good.
Right. Exactly. So I decided to make it a project. And I was like, you know what, this will be fun. So it was more as one, I thought this would be helpful for other folks.
Yeah.
And two, sometimes executive coaching can feel very like, oh, this is for executives. And I didn't want it to feel like only people at a certain level or at a certain age can get access to this help. So you'll see in the book, it's super conversational. Like I wanted it to feel like you're talking to your auntie or big sister, and they're just like, okay, come on, sit down and let's talk through this thing. So it doesn't feel so overwhelming, but it's fun. And, I'm cracking jokes in the book, or just, getting people kind of thinking a little differently about what do they want their story to be. And then importantly, how do you bring that story to life? So it's not just enough to have the vision, but also like, how do we start to get there?
So good. And I would say that that's where, and I'll include myself, a lot of times I'm stuck, right? I can visualize it. I can speak it. I might, tell a friend about it because I'm like, I need that encouragement, but it's actually implementing. Come on now. Because listen, y'all. Okay, I'm going to be transparent. I haven't gone through the whole book, but I was like, well, let me look and see what I did do. And so I'm like, oh, some of those things I'm still working on, but which was good, is I wasn't too hard on myself, because that, I could easily lean into that. I was like, Candice, don't, because you got to talk to yourself too. I was like, don't feel guilt and don't allow guilt and shame to come on, but it's those things that I saw that I had written down, in the first couple pages, like, okay, that sounded so good. Oh, it's sound good on paper, but actually taking the steps. So what wisdom, sis, can you share with to me and those who are listening about like taking those steps?
Yeah, so that's funny. So that's similar feedback, right? So the book, it builds on itself a lot, and I wrote it as a, people can kind of probably hear how you're talking about it. It's a workbook because the
Yeah.
intention is I didn't want to just kind of wax poetic about your own story and people think about it. I really wanted them to make it personal and make it actionable, right? So what you see is a lot of people kind of get into that vision and they're excited, but then as we get into the book, the part about like, okay, what are you going to do about it? People are like, oh. But the thing is, the wonderful thing about your story in this path, right? It's one step at a time. And
So
sometimes
good.
we make it too big. Like we make it of, I gotta lose 20 pounds and whatever. And the first time
Now,
I
see,
even
why'd you have to go with the weight stuff? Okay, go
listen,
ahead.
because listen, COVID is a thing.
Right. I'm like, you know how we used to be like freshman 15? I was like COVID-19, literally
Right.
getting
No, but
pounds.
it's the things that we do, and the thing is we instead of celebrating our successes or making the success so far in the future that we don't get these quick wins, is why we give up quickly.
So
Right.
good, sis.
So like if you think of a child, if you only celebrated them talking when they could, write a poem, we'd never celebrate. But what happens when a baby, what they say, they say mama and they don't even mean mama, right? They're babbling, but we're like, yay. But we need to have that same energy with us. So in the book, I talk about things like, what are your, let's talk about some short-term things. So not looking 10 years out, like what would you be amazingly excited about if you did in the next couple months?
So because good.
That's tangible. And then that's something we can celebrate. Because that's the other thing I'll say, it just think on the intent of this is we don't even really celebrate ourselves. So we will go ahead and do something we're supposed to do or do something we set, and then we never celebrate it. And then we wonder, but that's how our brains are wired. Our brains are wired to the things that get celebrated. You want to do that more because we like that celebration.
Right.
And so as you're getting closer to your goal, if you're not celebrating it, you're really telling your brain it's not a big deal. So if your brain doesn't think it's a big deal, then why in the world would you, stop scrolling on your phone and actually go do that thing again? Because your brain is like, it's not a big deal.
So good, sis. I wish I could reach out and touch you. I'd be like, good. Yes, that's good. So I'm thinking about, and I feel like I read a quote literally about what you're saying. I think I read it yesterday about celebrating ourselves. Of course, celebrating others, but celebrating those accomplishments. And I remember listening to a broadcast on the radio, and they were talking about, it was some women who were going through like recovery. And so they call it celebrating like 24-hour victories, like small things, that they didn't go back. They didn't take that drink or they didn't make that phone call, and just celebrating that. And that stuck with me, like celebrating, because really we say small, but they're really not small. You deciding whatever it is God has placed on your heart to do, like you said, what can you accomplish? I think you said what can you look forward to doing in the next couple of months, and celebrating that. And then I thought about in the Word of God, right? In Genesis, when God created it, he sat back and said,
it is good. Every day. Right.
Every day. He didn't wait.
He wasn't done. Right. But he said, it is good. I love that. I hadn't even considered that before, but you're right. And I think sometimes we feel like we need to get to the finish line. And unfortunately, two things happen. One, we make the finish line too far out, or then when we get to the finish line, we move it and say, well, that was good, but let me, but let me get further. So now we never get to the point of celebrating. There's a whole movement around what they call like micro habits or small habits. And it's like, instead of saying to yourself, I'm going to go, work out for an hour a day, every day. It's like, you know what? I'm gonna do 10 jumping jacks every time I get up to go to the bathroom. When I get back, I'm gonna do 10 jumping jacks. That's it. Just every time. And then just celebrate that, and then start to build on that, instead of now every time I do it, I'm like, good job, versus never taking an hour there.
Right. So good. So good, sis. So what and we've talked a little bit about this, but I want you to well, let me just ask the question. For the person who, and let me share the official title, right? Whose life is this anyway? That's so
Yeah.
good. Making your life your story.
Yeah.
Whose life is this anyway? That's good. We want you to be intentional, right? About
And
your life, about your story. And so what do you want the person who is watching, maybe, maybe they have your book, maybe they're going to go purchase them. We'll talk later about how you can share that information. But what do you want them to grab a hold of as they're going through this workbook?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing is in that kind of subtitle that your life is your story.
Mm,
It's yours. And every day you are writing that story. So we're never at a point of inaction. So either we're writing that we're going to stay where we are, or we're writing that we're going to go somewhere different. But every day you're writing something.
every day. Yeah.
Every day. So that's the first thing about that rewriting part. The next thing is this whole question of what your story is feels sometimes big, but it doesn't have to be. So like the way the book breaks it down, and quite frankly, I go through it every couple, like at least twice a year as well, because every time you go through it, it just does it in such a way that helps you it not feel overwhelming.
So
Because
good.
if you feel overwhelming, then we're gonna stop.
Yep.
And so this is about that. And then that last thing is action. So no matter how amazing the story is, unless you start to take action to start living it, that's when the power comes up. And
Yep.
that's when one of the phrases that I use in the book is, what would you do if you accomplish this thing that would make you ridiculously proud of yourself? And I love that phrase. A friend of mine
Yes.
mentioned it because it's not just like, that's good. No, like what would make you ridiculously proud?
So
Uh,
good.
Shout out again, a friend of mine, Karen Eber, who has an amazing TED Talk, by the way, um, on storytelling and the power of story. But when she asked me that question, I got goosebumps. And she was telling the story, but it's like, yeah, the things that are in our story make us ridiculously proud.
Yes.
We're not just like, it's okay. So those are the things you want to grapple to, because those are worth the putting your phone down. It's worth the, staying up a little bit later. It's worth
Yep.
that because we're so excited about it.
Yep. Oh, I love that. Ridiculously proud.
Ridiculously proud.
So good. So I would dare to say that you even taking, what you did, these questions that you were writing down, then, sharing them with your friend to say, hey, you need to publish this. I'm sure that you publishing this book made you ridiculously proud. Am I right?
It did. And that was funny because I didn't
Yay.
even know that was in my story, right? So it was kind of like I say a life of its own, but it was one of those things where, again, like me moving here, it was so clear that God was making this path. Literally,
So
I think
good.
when you and I met, I was working out of a co-work locations, like, so one of the places where a lot of different people would
Well, I
come.
remember we met there.
We met there.
We met there. I had never been to a co-working space before, so thank you, sis.
Well, somebody literally would sit down next to me. I would strike up a conversation, and they would literally tell me the next thing I needed to know about the book. Like just randomly, like, oh, you're writing a book, cool. You need to do these things. I'd be like, okay, cool. Or they'd be like, hey, oh, you need a person to illustrate it for you. And they'd be like, oh, you should check out these people. It was just so it was so clear
I
that
love
this was
that.
kind of a guided
Yes.
situation that, yes, it made me ridiculously proud, because if you had asked me 10 years ago
Come
without
on.
writing a book, I'd have been like, I don't know anything about writing a book. What are you talking about?
So good. I love that, sis. I love that. And let me say, I've shared this with students as recently as this week, like, and the way I said it was like with your dreams, like the resources will come.
Yeah,
It will. I know that's a part of your story, Keturah. That's a part of mine. Like God will, He's the one that plants it in us, right?
yeah,
Anyway, the idea, the goals, the dreams, it's going to come to pass. And like we said earlier, He will use people and things, event situations to bring
yeah,
it. I love that. I pray that everyone watching is grabbing a hold of this. That is so amazing. And I didn't know that part of your story. As
It was
far as
wild. Like literally, somebody would sit down and they'd be like, "Oh, here's something," and I was like, "I didn't even know that that was a thing." But
right,
okay,
right. But
so
you said this earlier, you were open to sharing that, right?
yeah,
So, you know, and then by you speaking up and say, yeah, this is what I'm working on, you were able to get the resources or, connections and tips that you needed to move you forward to actually producing this. Like, this is so good. This is so good. It's so good. So talk about Keturah, like a crazy, amazing, like testimony that came out of you producing this book. Something that you were like,
yeah.
yeah, this was
Well,
God.
so part of it was literally like I was saying, like people just kept coming up to me and just helping me with that next thing I needed, and I didn't even know that I needed. So that was part of
Yes.
it. Also, there was a situation with a friend of mine had come over. So our daughters play together. So
Mhm.
she had come over to the house, and I can't remember what I was doing, but I was somewhere else in the house. And so I had copies of the book on a bookshelf, but it was kind of like out of the way and kind of almost behind the piano. And so she went over there because she was curious, like why there were so many copies of this book. And that's how she found out I had a book because I didn't even tell her. And
I remember
she
this story.
she was the director of a conference for teens. And I didn't even know she directed this conference. I mean, apparently we need to be better friends so we can share more. But so she's like, this would be perfect for the conference. And they ended up using it for this conference, which was amazing. But
So
nothing
good.
that I had orchestrated, right? I wasn't out there with like my book and telling people like, oh, here, you got to use this and paying for Facebook ads or whatever. It was just how, you know, if how the Lord orchestrated and brought those things together,
So
which
good.
is because I think the nice thing about our testimony sometimes is when we can clearly see how it was not us. Like there are elements of us because it couldn't have happened, right? If I didn't write the book, like it wouldn't have happened. So there are
Right.
elements, but there's no way we could have planned her happening to be over my house. Girl, I don't even
So
think she's been in
good.
my house since then. We couldn't have planned that we weren't sitting down, that she happened to see all those copies, that she happened to go investigate. So,
So
I mean,
good.
it was, yeah, just so that to me was just kind of a reiteration that when you are on this path and living in your story, that, we have to do less worry about making it all happen and more
So
about just
good.
making sure we're living it.
So good. And what's the last part you said? I think it cut off a little bit.
Sorry.
Um,
We have to deal less with just making it all come together and then just making sure we're living that story, because when you're
so
living it, those opportunities come.
that's so, so good. Because I would say it's easy to, and I'll talk about me, like to fast forward.
Yeah.
I'm a dreamer. So I'm like already into, 2025, which I don't think anything's wrong with that. But sometimes I could miss living today.
Oh,
So I have to be intentional about
yeah.
living in the day. Like even now, like I'm looking out the window, I'm gonna get outside. Listen, if you haven't been outside today, y'all, get outside.
Beautiful.
Just
Beautiful.
beautiful here in the city. Wherever you're watching this from, I hope you can get outside. Even if it's raining, just take your umbrella, you'll be okay. But just taking those moments to live today, to live my story today, to rest. And that's another conversation too. But that's so good. So, so good. Thank you. Are there any other well, I'll just ask you this. Back to us being at that focus group with Leadership
Yep.
Louisville. Now, I remember you had the opportunity to speak at, I think it was at the annual conference. Do you mind to share?
Yeah.
Because I think that's so cool.
Yeah. So again, this is what happens when you stand in your story, right? So I'm at this focus group. These people don't know me. I don't know them. I have no idea how it came up of would I be willing to speak at their annual conference. No idea, right? But again, so I tell her sure, and at the
Yeah.
time I was working for, so all my career I've worked for Fortune 100 companies. So a lot of times when
Mhm.
people invite you to these conferences, they really want the representation of your company, which is completely fine.
Yeah.
So I'm talking to her about the stuff I do in my company, somehow, some way, I have no idea how, she figured out that I had a book. And she's like, yeah, I mean, the company is great, but I'd like you to come and talk about your book, which was crazy.
Love it.
So, and then what was so funny about it is that the conference kept changing, and she was like, well, I don't know if we're going to have space for you. And I'm like, I'm good either way.
Right.
And what they ended up doing is making it a lunch session, but while people were having lunch. And she's like, honestly, I don't even know if anyone's going to come because, it's a jam-packed session. This is their only break. And so, my expectations were kind of low. So they seated the room for maybe 75 people, 80, 100 people, something like that. And girl was standing room only. And we had 30 minutes. And it was amazing. So much so, and again, this is how you never know the end of your story. Someone saw me present there, told another woman, and said, you got to have her come present, who worked at my current company. And by the time she reached out to me, I was then internal. And so now she sent me on this amazing circuit of speaking at conferences and doing all these things. But who knows, when you say yes to this one thing in your story,
So
how
good.
it can to evolve your story.
Yep.
Because I speak at conferences and all these other things, but it's not because I'm out there saying something. It's because like my story is continuing to travel, which is great. And then it kind of takes the burden off of you to kind of, you don't have to be the engine behind your story, but you do have to kind of walk in it.
Yep. So good. So good, sis. Oh my goodness. I love it so, so much. So I want to talk about, and we're almost done. I mean, I pray that everybody watching is really getting something out of this. If you have any questions for Keturah, drop them in the comments. Share this. I don't think I ever said that. Share this broadcast because people need to know that they have a story to write. They have a story to live. A beautiful one. And so your workbook, it's helping just who you are and just as you approach your work and and as you're coaching, others, that you're helping them to be intentional. We kind of talked about that earlier. So why do you think it's important, or could you talk about why it is important to have that intention around your story?
Yeah, so I think it's important to be intentional about it because while it is your story, it doesn't happen by happenstance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, it's not going to just look up and, oh, you're in the middle of this amazing thing. You have to be intentional about it. Excuse me. And when I think about intention, I think about like, how do you make sure that the things that I'm doing, kind of checking yourself to say, does this line up to my story?
So
And
good.
I say that about being intentional, but because so I'll be transparent. Like sometimes my husband laughs at me because sometimes I'm like, babe, I think we need a bigger house, right? And he's like, why? And I'm like, well, all the people on my team, their houses are bigger than mine, and I'm feeling a kind of way. But the funny thing about it is, in my story, is that I love being able to support, namely in sometimes in a financial way, people. But if all of my finances were wrapped up in my house, I wouldn't be able to do that.
So
So
good.
my story is about giving, and this is not to say people with big houses don't give. That's not the
Right.
moral.
Right.
The point is that while I could technically afford a larger house, but that would then take away my ability to then do some other things for people. So when I think about being intentional, I think about looking at all of my decisions through the lens of my story to say, hey, does this decision line up with my story, or is it really at odds or distracting me from my story?
Oh, that's good.
That's what intention is. And again, when you're excited about your story, it doesn't feel like a chore. It feels like oh yeah, you know what? I'm good. I'm staying on track with my story.
Yep.
So that's to me what intention is. It's just about kind of like taking every decision through that lens to say, is this getting me closer to the story that I love and
Right.
that's gonna make me insanely proud of myself, or is it getting me further away?
So good. So good. And taking the time out to do that, right? And that's why having a workbook like this, having a book like this is so good because even though there's been such a shutdown, right, because of COVID, but things are starting to open back up. We go. Ooh, we go. So then, you look up and you're like, wait, how did I end up here? Is that really a part of, or was that supposed to be a part of the story? Now, God can use anything, right? All things work together. One of my favorite verses, Romans 8:28, all things work together for the good.
Yep.
But, I think it's just important to point out the need for us to slow down and be intentional about doing that reflection on, like you said, does this line up? Is this in alignment with my values? Is this in alignment with my story?
Yeah. And the thing is, sometimes when we think about like taking time, then we start like, oh, that means it's gotta be. But the thing is, a lot of times when I remember I was coaching this guy and he was like, the most life-altering thing he needed to do to change his career was he needed to get this certification. He's like, I don't have time to get this certification. I'm like, okay, that's fair.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, we're about to wrap up, but we got about 5 more minutes. Let's just talk me through, like, what would it take to do this certification? So he walked me through, and I'm like, don't even worry about when you have time to do it. But let's just talk through.
Right.
But it ended up that what he needed to get this certification was like 12 hours, like something very insignificant. But in his mind, he had stopped at, I don't have time.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't give himself the literal 5 minutes it took for us to talk through how long he had. Because then at the end of it, he's like, oh, I can find 12 hours. I'm like, because if you're telling me this thing is going to be life altering for you, but it's not worth 12 hours. I mean, like something's not right. So, but that was in 5 minutes. Yeah. So a lot of times we think, this is not about like becoming a monk and having to go to a cave for 6 months to figure out your story. This is about putting this thing down. This is about, going to a quiet place and then just focusing on some questions or some thoughts to see what comes up. Yeah. And the thing is, we owe that to ourselves. Like Candice, so if you called me and was like, sure, I'm in a place and I need to talk to you, I would talk, we would talk whatever. The last time we talked, we talked about 2 hours, right? So if I have 2 hours to give to you, which is, my girl and my sister, but I can't give 30 minutes. That doesn't make any sense, right? So so if you say like, I'm too busy for this, it's really about where we put our priorities. And again, are those priorities getting you closer to your story, or are they getting you further from your story? Because you are setting your priorities. And yes, the priorities have repercussions, but you're setting them. So someone says, like, I can't, I'll give the classic one we have in corporate America, like, I want to spend more time with my family. And it's like, okay, we'll go home. Well, I can't go home. I'm like, is somebody chaining you to your desk? No. But if I go home, such and such will happen. I'm like, okay, there are repercussions, but you have to decide what's more important.
Right.
What your goal is,
right,
or what the repercussions are.
Right.
And once you make that decision, then you can't be angry about it because you are deciding. They're not deciding. You're deciding.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that is so good. So good, sis. So good. So, okay, I'm gonna look at the comments. Sharonda had put this just a little bit earlier that she often talks about the power of our story and how it can be our story can be a blessing to others. That's so good. That is so good. And actually, that's a great segue. I was going to talk about another Bible verse that I love where it talks about we are overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony, and that's what I wanted Vision Speak to be, right? Us sharing, having amazing people on to share their testimony, because that helps the person, but that also helps somebody else. Like, I'm getting all this goodness from Keturah, and I'm like, yes. But I hope everyone else is doing the same. You're hearing her, but you're also listening to Holy Spirit, to what you need to get and then move forward. So how it can be a blessing to others. That's so good. Yeah. So you are definitely a blessing to others. So thank you.
Now, listen, you know what? It was funny. And sometimes, I get a blessing by the stuff. It's like, it's a good reminder for me. Like, oh, wait, yeah. how am I living this story? And when I think about the power of other people's testimony, stories are so important because it allows us to connect, right? So when we hear a story, we can
Yes.
connect to it because then we can start to see ourselves in it. So it allows us to connect to like, oh, this thing is possible. It allows us to connect to someone else because I hear your story, Candice, and I'm like, oh yeah, like this is how we're similar.
Yes.
And sometimes the experiences that we have are even helpful for someone else to hear. So
Yep.
like when I share my testimony about writing this book, and I didn't know anything about writing a book, right? But that's not necessary because if this is on my path, then those things will kind of be available. And again, you got
Yeah.
to do your groundwork and all that stuff, but it's possible. So when I think of testimony, I think of my experience is not only for my blessing and development, but can also be for the blessing and development of someone else. And so
Absolutely.
who am I not to share that so that you can kind of either learn from my experience or, you can hear my experience, we can have a conversation and we both can grow from it.
Yes. So good. So good. I think about, Jesus and his ministry, right? Like he taught in parables. He was able to connect with those his brothers and sisters, right? Through those parables that hit directly what they were familiar with.
Yeah.
So that's so good. Nini, and she is a storyteller as well. So I'm so glad, Nishan, I'm so glad you're watching. But she says, does this line up with my story? I love that. Yet what you said, Ken, God works everything for the good. He is so good. And Nishan, that helps me because some parts of my story, I'm like, oh, but they happen by my choice. Maybe I was impacted by someone else's choice,
Yeah.
but I've been saying this and actually doing this. I dare to see the good in it. I have to
That's beautiful. Yes.
dare to see the good, even as we talk about the year that we've had, right? And even the
Yeah.
repercussions of that. There's been some good. Yes, Keturah, we had to go home and we were there with the kids and you was there with your hubby, but there was good, right? There was
Right.
some that came out of it.
I love her comment because even it's like, does this line up closer to my story? But I think of
Yeah.
like your story is something that is, well, we may talk on it or not. Like your story can change kind of over time. But the
Yeah.
point is like, even if I'm going away from it, that story is still there. So like I'm making my way
Plot
back to my
twist. Listen, plot
yeah,
twist.
plot twist. Yeah. Or some of the things that we think is a plot twist actually is getting us closer because
Wow.
I'll share before I left my last company, girl, I thought I was ready to leave 3 years before I left. But I was like, I just know it's time for me to go. Lord, it's time for me to go. And, I was praying for deliverance. And it wasn't that I didn't enjoy. I loved what I was doing, but I could just kind of see the writing on the wall. Like this was not the place for me for the rest of my career. So what felt like the stalling of my story, Candice, I was able to do some amazing things in those 3 years.
So good.
And had the story gone as I had expected it to go, I wouldn't have that. Girl, I taught classes in 3 or 4 different countries during those 3 years. I wrote the book through those 3 years. All of these things that felt like a deviation from my story, but it was in fact the helping to realize my story.
So
And
good.
that's what I think is the power of being willing to like make sure that I'm making choices in line and to be willing to be like, okay, and yet still, guide me where I'm supposed to go and in the time that I'm supposed to go there.
So good. I hear the word surrender because that is speaking directly to me because I'm a planner, Keturah. You know that. Like, and I, be having my notes. Okay, God, and I'm like, okay. So
Yeah.
this is the season that I'm in, you all.
Had I left, Candice, that job, those 3 years when I thought I was going to be, there's no
Wow.
way I would have done
Right.
most of what I've done.
Right.
And that's so, yes, I think we are to have a plan. I'm also a planner. And it's about putting that plan in the hand of the master to be like, okay, use whiteout where necessary, insert some steps, like
Erase and then write over. Come on now. Yeah.
right, do
He has
whatever.
He has
Yeah.
permission to veto is what.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
it could be, sometimes it's a beautiful plan, right? Sometimes I sit back and look in awe at my plan. Like,
What, right. We said look back and celebrate, right?
but we have to be open to, sometimes our story kind of shapes up a little differently than we would expect.
Yes.
But
Yes.
again, it's all possible and it's all actionable. So it's not something that you're going to just sit on the couch and do. But when it excites you, it's okay. Like it
Yep.
doesn't feel like work. It feels like, man, this is amazing.
Yes. Yes. And I just want to share just what's come to my heart that it is possible. So for anyone who's watching this now or watches later, like I was thinking about this verse earlier, God came that we might have a life and have life more abundantly. So there is a ridiculous, amazing story
Yeah.
in you, around you, with you, however you want to say it, no matter what has gone on in your life.
Yeah. Or what
No
stage
matter
you
what.
are in your life. Like
Right.
your story, your story can kind of change and adjust. And some people think, well, I remember meeting this young woman and she was like, you know, I'm 28 and I feel like it's already too late. And, I looked at her and I was like, whoa, like, no, are you kidding me? You're a
Right.
baby. But sometimes
Right.
we put those same things on us as well. And
Yeah.
while our stories may change, I sometimes give the analogy, what looked good on what the clothes that looked good on me in my 20s don't quite hit like they used to.
They'll
So,
hit just like, yeah.
yeah, not quite. But so while it has evolved a little bit, it doesn't mean
Yeah.
like, okay, now I can't look good when I'm dressing up, right? It just means like that may look a little bit differently now.
Right. So
So
good.
I think we have to not just say that, oh, it's too late for my story, or
Yeah.
oh, it's that part of my life is gone. Because when that story is in you, you got to trust the process and the fact that it is possible.
Yes, so good, so good. And I definitely think about I'll say our seasoned um brothers and sisters. I'll just say that. I was gonna say seasoned saints, but you might be watching this and you may not be a believer just yet. But I'll just say our seasoned folks. And I think just society and culture is like, oh, when you reach, retirement age, that's it. And I've been around people who think that it's over, because they're older. And I'm like, it is not. I had actually it's and she is 74. So she's just a few years older than my parents, and they all went to school together. When I say she's doing her thing at 74, I mean, and I need to have her on the show, but she has her own show on Facebook. She goes live, I think, every Friday. And I'm like, listen, let me get some tips from you. Let me write down. Listen, I mean, got a whole thing, got a book. She has a book. She speaks. I mean, just amazing. And not that that's everybody's story, but for those who may watch this and think it's over because of my age or just whatever, it's not. It's not. I heard this on a podcast where we talk about retirement, but we need to change the perspective, and they called it refirement.
Oh, I like
Or a
that.
refire, so it's your
Yeah.
story is just evolving, like you said, Keturah. So just a different chapter, so it'll look a little different, but it still can be ridiculously amazing.
Yes, it can be. And that's what sometimes I tell people who are, if you're discouraged, I tell them sometimes,
Yeah.
this is a paragraph or maybe even a chapter in your story, but this is not the
Yeah.
whole story.
Yeah.
And there are some times that we'll go through experiences and it does feel like it's the whole book. Like it feels like I'm never going to be people with children, you think you are never going to get through potty training ever. Like this kid's going to be 25 and I'm going to be changing a diaper. But it's not the
That's false,
truth.
guys. False. Yeah.
But it's not the truth. And there's sometimes in our stories, it feels like whatever chapter or paragraph I'm in, I'm going to be here forever. But that's not it. And
So good.
sometimes that's in our power to change because we make different decisions. And sometimes, like we were saying early on, the end is not here yet. It's going to be okay in the end. And we just kind of have to weather that storm and stay in faith.
So good. And there's stories within stories, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Listen, we could go on this forever because there's house
I
stories
know.
intertwined together. And
I know.
sometimes I think of this analogy of like, of God conducting an orchestra, and we're all instruments, right? And it's not just that the instrument sounds good, it's the combination of them that's amazing. And sometimes our stories, when they collide together, are just beautiful things.
So good.
I'm here, with my instrument, and I'm like, I'm not going to play because I'm not first chair. It can mess up the dynamic, right?
Yeah. We need y'all
So
to play. Come on now.
come on, play your story, because it's going to
Story.
make you kind of in a better place. And it also, you never know how you are adding to someone else's story.
That's so good. Come on, sis. So I'm here. Show up. Like we need you.
Yeah,
It's time. It's
yeah.
time. It's time for you to show up, to arise, take your place, take your position. Get that pen out, get that pencil out.
Yeah.
And write. And I think I was going to say this earlier. I'll say it now. That there is power in writing it down. Right. The word says write
Oh,
vision
make it plain.
plain, right? So
Yeah.
that he reads it may run. And then it goes talk about, don't tarry, it's for an appointed time. But when we write it down, you write it, whether it's in the workbook or a journal or, I got paper all over. Listen, y'all, I'm a writer, so I got it everywhere. But that gives you the fuel you need to run on, right?
Oh, yeah. And that's again why I wanted to make it a workbook, because for me, I
Yeah.
needed to kind of write it down to see it.
Yes.
And also, I needed to also be able to remind myself of it later. So one of
Yeah.
my favorite concepts in the Bible is like when God did these amazing things for the children of Israel, oftentimes he had them create an altar as a reminder, because he was like, y'all not gonna remember. So I want you to make an altar so that when your children pass it and say, hey, why is that here? You can retell the story. And
Yes.
sometimes we need to create our own altars of our stories so that when we get to parts where it feels down, we can go back and say, wait a minute, this is how I was brought through my story before. So that's
Yes.
why, even in the book, it gives the ability to do multiple revisions to your story. So you can start to see, like, hey, this was my story 6 months ago. Do I want to stay with that same story? Do I want to change? What's happened since that last story happened? Because writing your story or like helping you through it is not a one-time event. It's
Right.
kind of this ongoing evolution. And sometimes I had somebody write me completely out of the blue and tell me, she was like, you know what? I had gone through your book. I put it down. I went through it 6 months later. And she was saying how excited she was that those things were now in place in her life.
So good. Yeah.
She had forgotten that,
Yep.
this had kind of set her on that intention. So that's why I love it as well. Girl, you're gonna make me go
Yeah.
through it.
Listen, I know I have it right here, and even and I love how you said that because even the things I've written, and then I have some other documents that I've written, and I've been able to say, check, oh my gosh, I'm doing that now. Like I wrote down, I did a 3-year dream because I was my mentor, that was our homework. I took a Master Dream Academy. So she gave us homework to dream 3 years ahead with God. And so, me and God had a good time together. And I was reading it this morning in my prayer time, and I had written down that I was going to host, I called it a dream fair, but basically I would have guests on. And I think I was thinking in person. So that'll happen, in time. But I was going to have people on sharing their story, sharing their testimony so that it could be a blessing to somebody else. And here we are. Look, I almost fell on my chair. Here we are. Like, and that's what's happening. But I was able to say, oh my gosh, and Keturah, check. Come on.
Well, and again, that's the part of us writing things down and then
Yes.
willing to say, to make those decisions, to say, is this getting me closer to that story?
Right.
Because
Right.
they say without a vision, the people perish. If you don't have anything you're going towards, then of course your decisions are not going to get you closer there. So it's like
Yeah.
a GPS. So my kids, when they were younger, if they wanted to go anywhere, they were like, "Mommy, just put it in the GPS." And I was trying to tell them, the GPS doesn't know where Mary lives. Like, is this like you have to know the GPS needs two pieces of information to work.
Come on
They need
now.
to know where you are and they need to know where you're going,
Come on.
right? If
Sis.
not, it won't
Preach.
work. So if in our lives and in our story, you need to know where you're going for your story,
Yes.
but you
Yes.
also need to acknowledge where you are. So if
Yes.
I'm this person who never ever works out, but I'm going to say I'm going to work out 7 days a week, like I have to acknowledge where I am and
Yeah.
how that what's going to take me to get there,
Yeah.
because if I'm going to be discouraged.
Yeah.
So that's really important that we have those two things. And a lot of times we don't spend enough time on the future, so it's not inspiring to us. And if we're
Yeah.
not inspired, we're not going to take action.
Yep. So
So
good.
that's why I love writing this stuff down.
Okay. That was fire. Thank you, sis. Oh my goodness, so much. So, oh, hey, Carlos, Dr. Yates, come on now. He said that was good. Wasn't that good? I feel like we need is it Selah? Selah moment or Selah, Selah.
Oh
Okay,
yeah. Yeah.
rest
Applause.
in that.
I love
Yeah,
it.
that was good. So this was amazing, sister. I'm so glad to have you on
Oh yeah,
here.
I had so much fun.
It's This was amazing. Like I said, you all were just, happening to come in where we were having lunch and just going at it, because this is what we do when we've been able to get together. So tell the people, our amazing viewers, how they can get Whose Life Is This Anyway? Making Your Life Your Story. How can they grab a hold of this workbook?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's on Amazon.
Hey.
Absolutely, right. But also, if they want to connect with on my website, which is yourlife-yourstory.net. And then there's information about the book. There's some other resources on there, all things. Also, I would love to hear from them.
Oops.
What's helpful? Yeah, dash, not underscore. Thank you.
Let me change
Um,
that.
what was helpful, what's not helpful. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. So I would love to hear from you there, and just kind of what resonated, what not, or just to even connect. So as you can tell, this is something I'm really passionate about. I love helping
Yes.
people find their story. And so if I can be of any help to you, I'd love to do that as well.
So good. So yes, connect with Keturah on LinkedIn. Visit your life dash, not the underscore dash, yourstory.net to get your copy of the book. And also on Amazon, you can just, I was going to say Google, but you can just type in the name of the book. It'll come up. You all know how those algorithms are. So thank you, sis, so much. Is there anything else that you want to share before we end this show?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for creating this forum, right? So, it's amazing to just give this forum for not only people to kind of come on, because I think it's also encouraging to be reminded of your own story. So it was a
So
blessing
good.
to me. But then also this forum to kind of just share that story broadly. So just thank you for being persistent and reaching out, and
Oh, you're
just for
welcome, sis.
creating this space for this to exist. So thank
Thank
you for
you.
that. I have thoroughly enjoyed myself.
Oh, me too, sis. I appreciate that so much. We're celebrating, right? I'm like, oh yeah, let me celebrate.
Right, exactly.
Yes, a part of my story, taking the step and creating this. So thank you so much for that. And we do have a comment. Oh, thanks, Nene. She gave me the hand clap. I love emojis. So you all drop those emojis in there. I appreciate you being here and being on. So thank you, everybody. So we'll be back, or I'll be back next month with a special guest. I have somebody in mind, and I just need to send her the official invite for that. But it'll be the last Friday in May, whatever date that is. I can't think of what it is right now, but I'll be advertising. So I pray everyone has a beautiful weekend. Happy Derby.
Oh yeah, I know.
Right?
It's beautiful
I
out there.
know. I know,
Such a
y'all.
weird year.
Listen.
Such a
I'll
weird
just say,
year.
it's just interesting, but the races are still going on. So I guess I'll watch tomorrow. We'll see. We'll see. But Keturah, thank you so, so much. And everyone have a great, great rest of your Friday.
Thanks. See ya.